Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by onlinegreatbooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas.
Hi, folks. This is Brett. I'm the producer of the Online Great Books podcast, and you're hearing from me at the beginning of this show just to let you know that we decided to split this one into two parts. Scott and Karl, who are in the same room for this one, allegedly, cover H.G. Wells' book, The New World Order, and this is a pretty significant undertaking. Certainly generated a lot of thoughts and feelings. Scott and I talked yesterday, and we agreed that it would be best to give you a couple of weeks to savor this one. So today you're going to hear roughly the first hour and look for the continuation next week. Thanks for listening.
I'm Scott Hambrick.
I'm Karl Shute.
And today on the Online Great Books podcast, we're going to be talking about H.G. Wells' fever dream, The New World Order, published January of 1940. It's a little bit too intimate. Karl is actually here in the room with me.
Don't tell them that.
It's like things used to be before we all got the disease.
I'm in an undisclosed location.
Yeah.
So I didn't take notes on this one for the simple reason that I was driving in a car and I listened to it. I had Amazon's digital woman read it to me in the car. Made it better rather than H.G. Wells reading it. But I don't have notes handy, but I do have impressions.
I like it. That's all I ever have. It was published in January of 1940. So I'm going to assume that he wrote this probably in 38 and or 39. He's an Englishman, Herbert George Wells. You know him from The Time Machine and War of the Worlds. And he's an Englishman, so they are at war. Europe's on fire, and everybody's weirded out. You know how weirded out everybody's been about the coronavirus? Well, it seems to me like World War II would weird people out a lot more than that.
You might have had the foolish idea, as everybody did, that war was going to be over after World War I. It wasn't called that then. It was just the Great War. And just think that this couldn't happen again, and here it's happening again. And the bombs are bigger than ever. They didn't have the atomic bomb yet. But you might... Wells thinks that the human race is in danger. At least that's what he says in the book. And it compels him to say that the only way out of it, and this is where my primary disagreement with him is the only way out of it is collectivization. It's a hard word to say. Collectivization. One world government, world police force, complete and total collectivization. But he says it's going to be good.
You're right. I handed this thing to my daughter last night. Karl was here, and she started reading it, and she's like, "Oh, well, he can stop right here." It starts out, "The end of an age. In this small book, I want to sit down as compactly, clearly, and usefully as possible the gist of what I've learned about war and peace in the course of my life. I am not going to write peace propaganda here. I'm going to strip down certain general ideas and realities of primary importance to their framework, and so prepare a nucleus of useful knowledge for those who have to go on with this business of making a world in peace. I am not going to persuade people to say, yes, yes, for world peace. Already we've had too much abolition of war by making declarations and signing resolutions. Everybody wants peace or pretends to want peace, and there is no need to add even a sentence more to the vast volume of such ineffective stuff." And my daughter said, "All right, he's done there." And he would have been better off if he had stopped it.
Okay, so he thinks that you absolutely have to have one world government. And he's got this chapter on disruptive forces, and there were two big ones. There's the abolition of distance, and then the new power that we have in our machinery and everything else. And the new power organizations are destroying forests of the world at headlong speed, et cetera, et cetera. You've heard this sort of thing before. We're no longer distance. I drove 10 hours to this undisclosed location yesterday, and it was no big deal. And I went to the Will Rogers birthplace, and I gave it away. And I'm looking at this little tiny house and thinking what it was like in 1879. and it was just a half an hour drive for me today, it would have been days.
Right.
You would have been very far from everybody else. You wouldn't have cared what happened in New York. You wouldn't have cared what happened in St. Louis, which was, the big city on the West at that time. And now you have tweets from people in Hong Kong that you pay attention to. So distance has gone away, but he's not talking about Twitter here. He's talking about distance in terms of ability to apply violence.
Yeah, he says that almost every capital of every nation in the world is only an hour's plane ride away from high explosive shells. So almost every capital in the world was in danger of attack.
Mm-hmm.
He's right. Now what?
Well, there's only one solution, Scott. That's why I don't follow him. There's one solution, which is to have one world government. We have to ban weapons for everybody except the one world government. That's the only solution is complete. Well, he thinks it's going to be. Here's where it's funny.
Okay.
Here's where
I can't wait for this.
So he says we need complete control. Well, we need a one world government, but he thinks it's going to be nice because he also has in here. I don't know if he's the guy who came up with it. He has a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I didn't check whether this predates the United Nations. All right, so maybe he came up with it. I don't think the two go together. I don't think you can have freedom of speech. He wants to have freedom of speech because with freedom of speech, this is like a John Stuart Mill idea. You can test ideas in the marketplace of ideas and come up with the best ones. And so we have to have freedom of speech. And I just don't think if you're going to have this one world government that you can allow freedom of speech.
Of course not.
I don't think they ever do. That's a big mistake. If you ever, in my opinion, you ever read Hayek?
Mm-hmm.
He makes this point. If you're going to try to control your economy, you have to control the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's too complex of a system.
The road to serfdom.
And so you can't just have a little control because that amounts to no control. You have to have all, which leads to no free speech. I don't think that works. And he doesn't seem to notice that.
No, he doesn't seem to notice a lot of things.
He has nice words to say about Stalin.
Well, yeah, in harsh words for Marx. Early on here, I page 5 on mine, I know you listened to Karl, but he talks about World War I. So the title of the book's The New World Order. Mm-hmm. Well, there's an implication that there was an old world order. Mm-hmm. And under that old world order, he talks about there was a club, essentially, and the German Kaiser broke the tranquility of the world club wantonly and needlessly. And that war was the Great War, World War I, was the war fought against the Hohenzollerns. And they were to be expelled from the club, and certain punitive fines were to be paid, and then all would be well. And that was the British idea of 1914. And then Woodrow Wilson helps kick off the League of Nations. So this old world order has an idea of what things are supposed to be like. There's a club of nations, and they all act in this genteel way. Sovereign nations aren't supposed to, anymore anyway, try to seize territories. And they're not supposed to be expansionist. They're supposed to maintain the rules of the club. And he believes that the League of Nations was just an opiate of liberal thought, he says, that was to really just extend the life of that old club of nations and that old world order. So he goes from, criticizing that, and the League of Nations, in retrospect, was a failure by almost any measure. Certainly if its goal was to prevent world war, it didn't do that.
It had one job.
It had one job, and it didn't do that. It probably had other jobs too, but it didn't do that. And he says that this Second World War was a war to expel Adolf Hitler from the club and to reimpose these old club rules back onto society. Okay, whatever. QED, he just leaps and says world peace, if that's what we want, world peace means that there must be revolution, because the old world order has to be overthrown in every respect.
So the idea is to get rid of war, and that by doing the things that he wants to do, which involve, he doesn't call it that, universal basic income, rights to health care. He's got a list of rights, and a lot of them are entitlement, not rights. But if only we do that, people will have a happy life. And you'll get rid of war. And
Well, he doesn't say happy life, by the way. Like you said a while ago that he was concerned that the human race would just, destroy itself.
Yeah.
He doesn't say happy life, or at least I didn't catch it. I think it's just have a life.
Well, there's talk of how good it's going to be. There are some things. All right, there are some things that I thought were very good in this short book. One of the things is, but I'm going from memory, is the problem of the lack of toil. That you have lots of young men who had nothing to do, who are off the farms, who are living in the cities. The machines can do all the farm work better than the people could, and so they're displaced. That this is a big problem that you have to deal with in order to have the New World Order, probably in order to have peace, because who wants to go to war? Young men with nothing better to do.
Yeah, you're right.
If you had a population of 19-year-olds who have nothing to live for, okay, they have no stake in the present order, going to war when they.
So there is a mindset of this sort of ennui or disaffectation that can lead a young person or any person to think that war is better than the doldrums that they live in, where everything's dull and flat and whatever. But there's also a will to power, right? Where somebody that could be in a very good situation, someone like Ernst Jünger, and see glory there and gain and see war as something else, like almost an economic activity where they can gain things, not just avoid flat modern existence, right? Like, so there are a lot of people that seek out adventure because it's boring at home and leave the farm because they don't want to stare at the back of a mule the rest of their days. But there's also that's not what Napoleon was doing, and that's not what Jünger was doing, that's not what Hitler was doing, that's not what MacArthur was doing. In this short book, 120 pages or so, he doesn't acknowledge the fact that there are people who are driven in such a way that one world government just makes a bigger, juicier target for war and overthrow.
Oh, sure. Well, there's a way to get what he wants, which is for Hitler or Stalin
to win.
They just needed to win. If the British quit fighting, he would have got perpetual peace.
And he would have been okay, I think, if Stalin had won.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to know about the genocide in Ukraine.
Or does he?
Well, does he care?
He doesn't care.
No, Walter Durante knew about it, got a Pulitzer Prize for it, which the New York Times still has.
Never retracted his story. Not going to do it either. Here, right at the end of, I guess it's chapter 1, this is interesting to me. He says, world peace means all that much revolution. So, like I said, he talks about overthrowing the old world order. Then he goes on to say, the first thing, therefore, that has to be done in thinking out the primary problems of world peace is to realize this, that we are living in the end of a definite period of history, the period of the sovereign states. It's a big claim. As we used to say in the 80s with ever-increasing truth, we are in an age of transition. Now we get some measure of acuteness of the transition. It is a phase of human life which may lead, as I am trying to show, either to a new way of life for our species, or else to a longer or briefer, French word, of violence, misery, destruction, death, and the extinction of mankind. These are not rhetorical phrases I am using here. I mean exactly what I say, the disastrous extinction of mankind. That is the issue before us. So if that's what he thinks, if that's what any person thinks, then there's nothing off the table to fix the problem.
Right. It's the end of everything, so we can do whatever is necessary. It's that important. You see that now. I'm avoiding current events, but dear listener, you can look around and see that anyone who tries to convince you of any of the drastic things they want to say, that they want to do, always says, we have to do it or we're all going to die.
Or else. He'll think of the children.
Yeah, so that's not a new tactic. Is it true? Are we all going to die?
You bet.
Yeah, spoiler. We're all going to die. For me, the bigger question is, how do you want to live? If the human race goes extinct, well, it's going to happen anyway, eventually. The sun will expand and it will burn all the life off this globe at some point.
Yeah, death isn't the worst thing that can happen.
Well, it's the thing that's definitely going to happen.
Right.
Of more concern might be, how ought I to live? How ought a human being to live? Knowing that we're all doomed anyway, if you call it doom, it's going to happen. So do you want to live on the great big collectivist state that he's proposing?
Well, Wells doesn't care what you want. He's smarter than you. He's more perceptive than you. He knows people you don't know, and you're going to get what Wells thinks you should get. And
you're going to like it.
He doesn't even care if you like it.
Yeah, I think he thinks you're going to like it.
He wants to, like you said, we've got this problem of distance and this problem of really industrialization, mechanization, where there are people that are underemployed or not employed at all, and he's worried about that. But he thinks if you give them these things that they need, healthcare, shelter, universal basic income, essentially, that it's going to be the world of Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, and people are going to, pursue their interests, and there's going to be art that appears out of that and whatever. But my question to him would be like, well, if these young men aren't working because of mechanization, where's the art anyway? But he doesn't. This is really a shoddy book, and I was really disappointed in it. The guy has no idea what he doesn't know.
Well, if you brought up Gene Roddenberry, it'd be awfully easy to take the universal socialized collectivist whole if you've got a whole bunch of planets you can go to.
Right.
You have a perpetual frontier.
Open conference. It's chapter 2. This is where he talks about these disruptive forces, but he says in the second paragraph that in order to get to this order, this new world order, he says, we want to get to the same sincerity. Well, I have to back up a little bit more. We want to talk and tell exactly what our ideas and feelings are, not only to our fellow citizens, but to our allies, to neutrals, and, above all, to the people who are marshaled in arms against us. We want to get the same sincerity from them, because until we have worked out common basis of ideas with them, peace will be only in uncertain equilibrium while fresh antagonisms develop. HTF, does he think that people who have arms marshaled against you are going to sit down with deep sincerity and come to terms with him and his kin over their feelings and ideas? What is he? That's crazy. Did he ever write? He didn't write. He never wrote a school bus. Because if you write a school bus, you know that will never happen.
Yeah, if only we can get around and talk together and have encounter groups, we'll come to a consensus. That never happens. Is it Notes from the Underground? I don't know. There is such a thing as spite in human nature, where people will do things just because you don't want them to do it. It might be the thing of human nature. Like Augustine talks about this when he steals the pear. Why did I steal the pear? It was a crappy pear. He doesn't say crappy.
Yeah, humans will do X harm to you at the cost of X plus 1 harm to themselves.
Yes, and just talking about it, this is where a failure, in my opinion, to understand human nature leads you to do really stupid things. If you think that human beings are rational beings, entirely rational, then we could talk this out and we could come to a consensus and make our one world government, and we could have committee meetings, and you can tell people actually believe this because the multiplying committee meetings.
Right.
We'll solve everything through a committee meeting. No, you won't, because I hate you. That's not me talking, but that's somebody in the meeting. It doesn't matter how many meetings you have. It doesn't make you not hate people or just want to burn them down just to see it burn. And in other words, how would a perpetual peace, one world government come about? It would not come about through free speech and committee meetings.
Total revolution is how it comes about, he says.
Yeah, but he thinks that'll happen through committee meetings and free speech. Never happens that way.
Unless it does.
Well, when has it?
It might be. So he talks about there's a United States of America, and he says that there are some people who have written 1939. He cites some authors who have written about a United States of Europe. And then he says, well, there needs to be a united world. And then he kind of gives the skeleton of the United Nations. Mm-hmm. He writes up the Universal Declaration of Rights here. He writes up and he says, well, smarter men than I will polish this and make them. I went and looked it up. It maps pretty closely on the one at the United Nations. He talks about the International Peacekeeping Force. We've got those guys and they wear those blue helmets. Like, a lot of it's here.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be Alex Jones. I mean, go read this yourself and then go look it up. I mean, a lot of it's here.
Okay.
A lot of it's come to pass. What do we
coming
say about
to pass through committee meetings and free speech. I had the pleasure of reading with Seminar 1, the original OGBers, Tacitus. And I don't want to spoil it for all of you, but
you can't spoil 3,000-year-old books.
It's only 2,000 years old.
I'm sorry. Okay, you can spoil those.
Tacitus writes about Rome, the city of Rome, during the time of Tiberius, Caligula, although we've lost most of those pages, and Nero. And they have denunciations for treason all the time in the senatorial class. One guy got killed because he'd done a good poem. He'd done a poem, I think, about Germanicus, who had died, praising him. And then he had a party, and he had a pre-made poem, I think, for Drusus, who wasn't dead yet.
Right.
And word got out that he had pre-made an obituary poem, and that meant that he wanted him dead. And of course, then what they'll do is they'll say, you need to die. You either commit suicide or we kill you. We were talking in the seminar, why would you have to do this? Why would you have to get rid of anyone who might make fun of Caesar?
There are a lot of reasons.
Well, they were kind of jerks, but you have to, if you're going to keep the government running, it can't be made a mockery. It can't be made a mockery. You're not going to have free speech. If we have Secretary General Wells of the United World, do you think you can make fun of him?
Well, he says right here on page 13, before anything else, therefore, in this survey of the way to world peace, I put free speech and vigorous publication.
Yeah, but those are nice words, but you can't do it. If I say that you are if I make fun of you, if I draw a picture of you looking like Winnie the Pooh, H.G. Wells, you're going to put me in the gulag.
Karl says that we shouldn't have free speech. That's what I just heard.
That's not what I said.
What Karl is saying is...
Actually, no, what I'm saying is if you're saying you want world government, you're going to have to get rid of free speech. You're not going to be able to allow it.
There's a little chunk here about free speech I agree with him on. He says, if you find your bookseller or newsagent failing to distribute any type of publication whatever, even if you are in entire disagreement with the views of that publication, you should turn the weapon of the boycott upon the offender and find another bookseller or newsagent for everything you read. The would-be world citizen should subscribe also to such organization as the National Council for Civil Liberties. He should use any advantage his position may give him to check suppression of free speech, and should accustom himself to challenge nonsense politely but firmly, and say fearlessly and as clearly as possible what it is in his mind, and to listen as fearlessly to whatever is said to him.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that too.
But that conflicts with everything else he says in the book.
I know.
The two don't go together. He should have visited Comrade Stalin and then should have ducked out of the official retinue and gone to see what ordinary people could do in 1939.
Except they wouldn't let him do that because
they control the speech.
Right.
And why do they control the speech in Soviet Russia? To protect the revolution. They don't go together. Free speech, I wonder if I invert this. So does free speech therefore require sovereign nations? Does it require smaller governments? If a big government's going to get rid of it.
Oh, it doesn't require any government whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, if I stand on my stump of a tree and say something you don't like, you can just punch me in the nose.
Well, free speech doesn't mean there's no consequence. You should be able to say anything you want and get in trouble for it.
So you would need a particular kind of government in order to ensure that you could speak freely and not get punched in the nose. Or at least, if you punched me in the nose, you would have consequences.
Sure. Because there should be consequences of everything.
So it would require a certain kind of government to allow that. What I'm wondering is whether that sort of kind of government can long endure.
No.
And whether it can keep getting bigger and bigger without eventually getting rid of free speech.
Yeah. Free speech sows the undoing of whatever organization ensures it. I wish that wasn't the case. Well, see, I'm making all sorts of declarations already in this show that like he does, and it's so distasteful when he does it that it made me self-conscious. Judging anything that he said here, the weight of anything he said in this book, was difficult for me not because it was hard to do, but because I don't want to be like him. because he just makes all sorts of claims and doesn't back them up whatsoever. But if you do have a sort of government, whatever that is, that allows free speech, then that is such a powerful tool that it sows its own undoing in that.
Well, you have to be okay with it causing your fall from power. If you are the people in charge and your government allows free speech, that means that you have to be okay when you lose.
Well, but if you lose, then perhaps free speech goes away.
Yeah.
So, I don't think you can have absolute. So if you and I are going to design the perfect government, and there is no such thing, that's another thing that so many people have in their mind, I think, is that, you can come up with the secret sauce and then it's going to be all right or better. And I've been reading a lot and I don't think that's ever happened. I think that you do have to put fences around the free speech, and people don't like this, but I think there has to be blasphemy and maybe sedition and treason limits on it. But that's really difficult. How do you adjudicate, what's treason or sedition?
Well, you could have free speech if you have an intact culture where there are certain
What's that?
Well, I don't know. I'm thinking in McIntyre's terms. If you have a tradition that's reasonably intact, yes, you can have free speech, so you can question whether the guild has set their prices correctly, but you're not going to declare motherhood an abomination. There's some things you can talk about, and there's some things you just wouldn't.
Right.
Because polite people don't do that. If you take free speech to be complete liberty of speech, where you can say whatever and you can make fun of whatever, you're going to end up making fun and destroying the foundations of your free speech. And I'm thinking, Nietzsche claims this about Christianity. He thinks that its devotion to truth is its undoing. Well, that's a similar thing. Your devotion to freedom is the undoing of your devotion to freedom.
Right. That's the libertarian tail chasing. That's the problem. You can't do it for very long.
Not very long, no.
Apparently from 1789 to 1861 is how long that takes.
Did it last that long?
No. Whiskey Rebellion. It was like 3 years probably. He talks about the scale of modern life disrupting everything. There is no sort of occupation, fisheries, farming, textile work, metalwork, mining, which is not suffering from constant readjustment to new methods and facilities. Our traditions of trade and distribution flounder after these changes. Skilled occupations disappear in the general liquefaction. He says traditions of trade and distribution. And I wrote here, does he care about any other traditions?
No.
He doesn't.
No.
He doesn't seem to think so.
No, he says for Chesterton, his religion, it was nice for him, but he was just the same before as after. He makes fun of it, and that says, "Well, but I liked Chesterton. They were friends, actually."
I don't know how he could be.
Chesterton never met a man he didn't like.
Well, magnanimous GK. Mm-hmm. He talks about the League of Nations breaking down. He says it was legal, it was political. It was devised by an ex-professor of the old-fashioned history, assisted by a few politicians. So, I told you while we were talking yesterday, maybe it was on the phone, I don't know. These Edwardian guys and their faith in technology and progress is unbelievable to me. That, old-fashioned. What does the old-fashioned history mean? What does that mean? I'd like to be able to exhume him and have him explain to me what precisely is he talking about. He poops directly on some of these old-fashioned historians like Harry Elmer Barnes, who I'm a fan of, later in the book. I don't know what he's talking about, but he's this Edwardian guy, right? He's talked about the 1880s, like he's standing with one foot in the mid 19th century, and here he is in 1939 writing about political problems, and he's seen a lot of change come about, for sure. But he can't distinguish between the changes that have happened in technology and the changes that have happened in people, which is almost nothing. Well, people are still people.
All right, but I was talking about this with a child in the car yesterday. The amount of change that's happened, we were driving across the middle of this country, which if you've never done, you should. You should start on one end.
It's full.
And I didn't say stop anywhere. I just said you should drive through it.
All right.
Okay, they can look.
Don't stop.
Don't stop. They can look. And so I was telling her, so I was born in 1971, and think of all the things. And she says, you're a year before the first video game. So think of all the things that exist now that did not exist in 1971 and how different the world was. And then I said, well, my grandfather was born in 1902 and lived in north central Illinois, right on the border of Wisconsin. And it was pretty rural on a farm. You know, what did he have? And then we go back even further. And so his dad was probably born 1845, something like that. 1855. But those shoots have children late.
Virile.
Well, they wait a while, and then they find the girl, and then they have kids.
Well, unto her, right?
And we're driving across the plains, and this would have been full of buffalo. You know, millions and millions of buffalo. It's all gone. It's all gone. How many generations you go back and you just think, there was no electricity. There was no telegraph. Your primary power was a horse or foot. You know, how long do you have to go back until there's no machines at all? You know, we've been watching Tudor Farm on one of the streamers, and it's fun, and you get to see how you would have done farming if you lived in 1602. That's not very long ago. That's how many generations is that? There's not very many. You can count and see. It's not very many. I have a family tree that goes
10.
back that far. I know their names. It has changed an enormous amount.
And it's too soon to say if it's worked.
Right. But you can hypothesize the change, make it into this perpetual thing that's going to happen. Like technology is going to keep going forever.
Right.
And think that we therefore have to deal with technology changing forever. Well, I don't know that that's going to happen. You know, how much has the cell phone, everybody's favorite invention, how much has it changed in the last 10 years? In kind.
The price. Oh, the price. Oh, okay.
In degree, it has. You know, it's got more memory. The camera's better. But it's still the same thing as the first iPhone.
Yeah.
The first iPhone changed things. And now it's pretty much the same thing. It's just a little better.
Yeah, it's iterative.
Yeah. And for most of human history, we did not have that rate of change. So if you think it's going to happen, and then the second thing is you think it's going to happen. Well, I don't know if it's going to happen. The second thing is you have to do it. You have to do it. You have to be on this technological roller coaster, which leads to all your young men not having jobs. But do you have to industrialize? Like Wendell Berry talks about this. When in Jayber Crow, he capitalizes the economy, the war, these impersonal forces that demand things of you. Do they really? Do you have to do the things? Maybe you don't. And Wells doesn't seem he I was going to say a bad word. He says nasty things about Belloc.
Mm-hmm. Wells famously wrote an answer to his essay on restoration of property, which I have not read. I haven't read Wells'
medieval
rebuttal.
Fantasy, I think, is what he called it.
But it's not medieval. It doesn't have to be medieval for a government to help people own things. Like what a he makes a lot of ad hominems in here, and I'm prone to do that. And I'm going to try not to today. Now, next show it's on again, but I'm going to try not to do that about this guy.
Yeah, you don't. Do you have to go work? Well, nowadays there's no cubicle farms because of the current situation. But do you have to go? I need a better word than cubicle farm for a Zoom vampire, maybe. Do you have to be a Zoom vampire?
Karl, it's hard not to be. It's you know, I was talking to a friend the other day about we were talking about food and obesity. And the poorer you are in the United States, the more likely you are to be obese, you know, statistically.
Yes.
Right. So BMI goes up as income goes down around here. So we were talking about this, and he's like, well, you know, they need to quit eating that stuff. Full sugar Shasta Pop and the cheesy puffs and the Taco Bueno value meal or whatever the heck it is, you know. And I've been working hard to make our own food. I cannot grow green beans and can them and put them away for eating later for anything less than probably 5 times what it would cost to buy them at the store. It is much more expensive to grow virtually anything than it would be to buy it. For a lot of fast food, we can't prepare a nutritious meal for the family for the cost of the value meal at the Taco Bell. And now the quality is not comparable, but the price is there. The price is, you can compare the prices, and it's a lot cheaper to get your calories, from the Doritos or whatever than from, organic chicken and green beans that you raised. So you're saying, well, do you have to go do it? Well, if you're in a certain economic situation, it's really difficult to not play the game, eat the stuff at Taco Bell so that you can save a little bit of money so that you can, we're kind of in a trap.
Yeah. Let me pivot. Another thought that I had driving through Missouri. Given H.G. Wells is what I think is they miss something of human nature. So I was driving through and I thought, if you were an alien and you captured some humans and you were a humane alien or an alien and you wanted to treat them well, just like you've got lions. And so you want to have a habitat for lions that is somewhat like, we don't just have them in cages usually. We have them in something like what they would like. What would the habitat for humans be?
Oh, clearly a brutalist concrete structure with a below-ground parking and steel case furniture.
Yeah.
60 hertz, pulsing fluorescent lights. An HR harpy orbiting your cubicle.
Wouldn't that be terrible?
You to hit your thumb and say a word.
That would be the worst science fiction short story ever. It's 5,000 years from now, and you go see humans in the zoo, and there they are.
Crying and drinking instant coffee.
Yeah, getting fountain soda drinks.
I wrote here, big paragraph, read aloud.
Okay.
I don't know what it says, but I'm going to trust the notes I made earlier. Political federation, we have to realize, without a concurrent economic collectivization is bound to fail. The task of the peacemaker who really desires peace in a new world involves not merely a political but a profound social revolution, profounder even than the revolution attempted by the communists in Russia. The Russian Revolution failed not by its extremism, but through the impatience, violence, and intolerance of its onset, through lack of foresight and intellectual insufficiency. The cosmopolitan revolution to a world collectivism, which is the only alternative to chaos and degeneration before mankind, has to go much further than the Russian. It has to be more thorough and better conceived, and its achievement demands a much more heroic and more steadfast thrust. It serves no useful purpose to shut our eyes to the magnitude and intricacy of the task of making the world peaceful. These are the basic factors of the case. Would you like to make an esoteric reading of that, Karl? It has to be profounder even than the revolution attempted by the communists in Russia.
Yeah, the Russians didn't go far enough.
Yep.
It wasn't that they were too extreme. And this is where, I think Mr. Wells, when he's making fun of all of those English Catholics, Chesterton and Belloc, at least, they talk about the soul and things like that, but at least they have an idea that a human is an actual thing with an essence.
Wells, I was like, what does this guy know? Like, what is he supposed to know? I told you this yesterday. What is he supposed to know? And so I wanted to read about his education to kind of figure out what kind of fund of knowledge and like what sort of paradigm this guy has. He has a biology degree from, I think, Cambridge. He was born mid-century, the 19th century. He's a biologist trained in England. He's a Darwinian. Like, this is earth-shattering stuff when he is in college. He sees everything through the lens of evolution. Everything is going to be tested by the vicissitudes of the world, and everything is going to get better and have a better goodness of fit. Everything is a finch's beak to him. Yes, so, he doesn't have any room for a soul.
Even if you're an evolutionist, you can't do it that fast. You can't take your pecan trees and make them grow apples.
But if you have, let me see here, that the Russian Revolution failed through a lack of foresight and intellectual insufficiency. Well, if you have foresight and have sufficient intellect, you can put your thumb on the evolutionary scale.
Right.
If you're H.G. Wells, you can make it go where it needs to go.
There's some parts where he's absolutely right about the communists, where I was chuckling a little bit in the car.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a proletariat, and there's no such thing as capitalism.
Right.
I think that's true.
Yeah, and he doesn't think that the lower class is just imbued with virtue because of their situation, which
Right.
Marx did.
So he's right about that, but the reason he's right about that is that he's an elitist. So he thinks if the proletarians just get rid of their chains and rise up, that the world will be better and the state will fade away and everything will be glorious.
All communists are elitists, though, Karl.
In practice, yeah.
They are.
Yeah.
They think they know better.
Well, then they should say, proletarians, throw off your chains and we will guide you.
That's not good rhetoric.
Right. Right. So he's right about that. There's this foolishness in that, it seems to him and seems to me. We'll read the manifesto someday. It's on the infinity pile. Things will just be better. But that's not true. So he's got, his revolution will be the smart people running it. And that's the way any revolution ought to be if it's going to be good. It probably ought to be the smart people running it.
Wait a minute. What about the virtuous people running it?
That's even better. It ought to be the virtuous, smart people running it. Yeah, you're right. I accept your emendation. Even so, let's say you do have the smartest, most virtuous people in the world, whoever they would be, and they're running it. They still can't make the pecan tree grow apples.
Right.
Not without millions of years. So if you think you're going to get rid of war by changing human nature, that's impossible. You will not change human nature. Not in any reasonable horizon, which is why when we read the Iliad, which is the oldest book we read here at OGB, we could find older books. Heck, if you read Gilgamesh, which is maybe the oldest book you can find, maybe there's some Egyptian stuff that's just as old. That Gilgamesh, that poor Gilgamesh, he's so human. He's just like you. His friend dies and he doesn't know what to do about it. And you cry with him because he's just like you. Humans have not changed in any of our recorded history. We're the same people. We live a little bit longer because our water supply is better. We've got penicillin now. We figured a few things out, and so, but we're the same people. When Achilles does the things he does, I completely understand why he does it.
Yeah. I kept reading Wells saying, like you just said, he doesn't understand basic things about humans. And I hate him so much and his approach so much that it made me really self-conscious about my own approach. Like, well, what do I know about humans? If I'm saying he doesn't know, then what do I know? And then how can I prove it? So I can't prove what I know about humans because they're not science projects. He does, you can't, the social sciences ain't. And he's trying to do social science here, and it ain't. I made a joke that fell flat about riding the school bus. Like, I learned a lot about humans when I was riding the school bus.
Oh, I was supposed to laugh at that?
No, I don't know.
I never rode the school bus.
Oh, well, there you go. They're terrible. It's the school bus is a rough place, and you learn a lot, or you can learn a lot about human nature on the school bus. You can learn a lot about human nature from your siblings who supposedly care about you and love you and will throw a candy bar out in the street rather than cut it in half and share it with you sometimes, Like, all I have is my own experience, and I can't prove what I think I know about human nature to H.G. Wells from my experience. But I'm like, how did he get to be this old? Like, this is a man in his 60s, I think, at this point, or maybe even in his 70s. Like, where does this fucking guy live? Like,
well,
you know what I mean?
He talks with other people like him. He name drops a bunch. Oh, when I talked to Roosevelt.
He talked to Lenin. He talks about a
conversation with Lenin.
With Lenin.
Yeah. I want to go back to my metaphor from earlier and give it try to help out on this. So the difference, let's say I'm putting lions in a zoo and I study the lion and I see what lions are like. Do I try to change the lion? I'm studying him for a purpose because I have to make a place where that lion can live and thrive. but I can't change the lion. I wouldn't even think to change the lion. I try to find out what the lion is, and that's what I mean by essence. What's the whatness? That's a Latin word, quiddity. It means the whatness. What is the whatness of a lion?
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Once you know what it is, then you can do something for it. Well, what is a human being? And
that's interesting. He clearly thinks that there's a difference in kind between, because he talks about extinction of the human race, and all kinds of environmentalists talk about, the whatever animal that's on the extinction watch list or whatever. And they never try to change the panda. They just want to put the panda in its environments
Boy panda's not interested in girl panda.
Yeah.
We'd like to change that.
But they don't try to change the leopard spots to save them. But clearly, there's a difference in kind in them between the person, because no one treats the human in that way. If it's about an extinction event, we would try to change the human.
We went to, my daughter and I went to the Will Rogers birthplace. I said that before. And she's like, who is this guy? And I was explaining a little bit. And they have a plaque inside the house, which has his most famous quotas, which I never met a man I didn't like. I've met a few, but that's I think a better attitude. That is a non-Wellesian attitude. He sees humans as a project to be fixed, and he's just the guy to do it. I would hope that I and you, if you look at human beings, see them as something to be reverenced, something that, they might be going wrong. You were telling me about that guy in your welding class. You were trying to help him.
Yeah, there's a young man in my welding class. There are 9 people in my welding class. So if any of them
listen to this podcast,
I hope so, because I'm not going to tell these guys anything I didn't tell this guy. He's come every time he has come to welding class. He is high as a kite. When it's time to go on break, he buys everything in the vending machine and just eats everything. He's so high. And last night, I don't think it was weed. I think it was, I don't know, opiates. I don't know. And the welding instructor said, go over and help this guy. Couldn't help him. I mean, he's so impaired. And I told him the best help that I could give him was tell him, whatever it is you're taking, don't take it Monday or don't take it Tuesday, and come to class sober Tuesday night, and then we'll see what's going on. Yeah.
You're recognizing what he is. You're recognizing the situation, and you try to help. You cannot make him into a different person.
He's like, whoa.
I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was my experience in grad school. A proponent of marijuana legalization came up and was trying to get me on board, and was talking like that. I was like, I don't want to be like you.
No,
I don't want to do that. So you view the human animal. Chesterton and Belloc, they have a more transcendent view of the human, but I'm just taking it in Wells' terms. You view the human as an animal. Let's talk on his terms. What you wouldn't do to a lion, what he wants to do with humans.
Well, I think that Wells might say, well, yeah, I would. We're going to take him to...
We need vegetarian lions.
I don't know. What's the Queen's zoo? She has to have a zoo, right? She has that one and everything.
I don't know. It's probably got a great name, though.
So you're going to take an animal, a rare endangered animal, and you're going to take, again, this is an Edwardian guy. This guy's not a modern ecologist. He's not going to try to preserve the Serengeti. He's going to take a giraffe and he's going to put them in an enclosure. He's going to measure their food. He's going to try to guide the male with junk into the girl's junk and try to get baby giraffes. It's a very hands-on. He's an Edwardian. They're worse than the boomers. I said, I told you last night that we need to read some Jules Verne, and I think we ought to, because they had this concept of better living through science that is way crazier and farther reaching than any boomer who saw the moon landing in '69 is. They couldn't imagine anything that wouldn't be improved by having the batteries or steam or whatever in it, or a gear,
Gosh, it's understandable.
Sure.
Even if I think it went wrong, but it's understandable because just of the sheer amount of change that happened within a human lifetime.
You bet, but there's something to look at other than the technological advancements, which is, humans. You can never lose sight of humans, and Wells, I think he's done that.
Yeah, well, he makes, I don't need to pull quotes out. You can read it yourself. He makes fun of the Catholic British writers, of which, well, Chesterton would have been one, and Belloc would have been another. I don't know if Lewis was making noise, and he wasn't Catholic, but he was certainly adjacent. Well, the one thing that, whatever you think about their belief, the one thing about it that makes it better is they don't think that a human being is a science project.
Right. Yeah. Is there anybody that doesn't like C.S. Lewis?
Yeah, the guy that wrote there's a guy that wrote like anti-Narnia books. They made movies out of him. The Golden Compass, I think.
Wow.
He wanted to do Narnia without Aslan.
So his brain's broken.
Yeah. Yeah, so it depends. This is a huge question. This is like one of the big questions in philosophy is, what is a human being? Know thyself, it said over the Delphic oracle. Well, what are you? What is this thing that I know? If I'm a commodity, if I'm yet another industrial product to be improved, well, then maybe you can do Wells's project. I kept thinking as I was listening to this and the miles were going away of the Time Machine.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know that he already wrote how this works out. Or maybe he does know. So if you remember from the Time Machine, there's been a long time since I read it. It freaked me out when I was a kid. This guy makes a time machine and he goes in the future and he meets some people. And there's the pretty girl. She's one of the Eloi.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the Morlocks. So you have the upper class, the Fabian socialists, like Wells.
And the Morlocks.
Yeah, that was an intentional slip. Who work down in the caves and do all the grunt work and are of lesser intelligence. He's already worked out how his plan works. The smart people will do okay, and everyone else is a tool for the advancement of the smart people.
Chapter 4, Class War. Now here it is necessary to make a distinction which is far too frequently ignored. Collectivization means the handling of the common affairs of mankind by a common control responsible to the whole community. Huh? How do you have a common control that controls everything, but is yet responsible to the whole community? All right, we'll let it slide.
That's the problem, yeah.
It means the suppression of go as you please in social and economic affairs.
Mm-hmm.
In social and economic affairs just as much as in international affairs. It means the frank abolition of profit-seeking and of every device by which human beings contrive to be parasitic on their fellow man. It is the practical realization of the brotherhood of man through a common control. What?
Practical realization of the brotherhood of man. That means that's going to be done with guns. That's all I'm saying.
It means all that, and it means no more than that. The necessary nature of that control, the way to attain it and to maintain it, shall have to be discussed. So he goes on to discuss it. Holy. So you know why I wanted to read this, right, Karl?
From the title?
From the title, because George Herbert Walker talked about a New World Order and 1,000 Points of Light. He was a CIA spook, and then I hear crazy people talk about it. Alex Jones, whatever. Yeah, it's fun. So like what's the big deal? Did they just catch this piece of rhetoric from the title of this book, or is this the owner's manual or the implementation manual? What is it, Karl? I think it's the implementation manual.
Yeah, except he's not saying everything. Either he doesn't want to say it. It's not the time to say it. The only way this is going to happen is through nefarious means. Whether it's outright violence or whatever, that's the only way you're going to make something like this happen. And he does not talk in detail about that. This responsible to the whole community means the handling of common affairs of mankind by a common control responsible to no, it won't be responsible to the whole community, because if it were, it would never happen.
Right.
Because the whole community, half of them hate you and will not do this.
At least half.
How will you abolish profit seeking? That's great. How are you going to do that? You're going to make it illegal for people to make a profit, which means you're going to have price controls, which means you're going to have to shoot the people that don't abide by it. Every law is backed by violence. You need to think about that. So this is the subtext that he's not saying out loud. Either he hasn't realized it or he doesn't want to say it.
I don't think he's realized it, because when he declares his human rights, he thinks that, I think he believes that if people are provided with this shelter, if they're provided with this health care, and they're provided with this money, there will be no need for it. And it breaks the financial system. He says, what is money? What are banks for? I think he thinks that if people's basic needs, he's Gene Roddenberry here. He's Edwardian man. He's a steampunk messing with people. He thinks that if we can just take care of these things, they will take care of all of the things. But he doesn't understand that profit seeking is a natural consequence of rationality. Right? If you figure out how to dig a hole better than you could before, whether cash changes hands or not, you have profited.
Yeah, it's probably a bit of human nature. So the lion does not have, as far as we know, a sense of the future. This is why animals generally seem, you can't tell because they don't talk, but they'll seem happy.
Mm-hmm. Content, at least. Yeah,
they don't know. They don't worry about next week. The curse or blessing of the human being is that you can view yourself as an item in the future. And now you have to prepare for the future. And profit seeking is part of your having, gosh, I'm thinking of Heidegger right now, a being within the horizon of care. That you, we probably won't read Heidegger here. Maybe a little bit. We won't read Being in Time, though. I wouldn't inflict that on you.
Well, how about this? I don't have fur or claws, and winter's hard.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to be excessively productive when I can be, because there are long parts of the year where I cannot be. Just our physical makeup means that we have to, the bee, by the way.
Well, like the bee or the ant, but
yeah.
The difference is that if you did not have that preparatory foresight, you would be restricted to living in certain regions of the world where the ground is so fertile that getting sustenance is easy.
Right. But he thinks we're there. Right, he thinks that the technology has made the whole world that. Right, he's seen nitrogen fertilizer where there was none. He's seen the diesel tractor where there had not been one. He thinks we're there. He thinks that the world's the tropics now, and the fruit falls out of the trees on your head, and then you think of gravity, and you're like the Edwardian. The point.
I love reading books that you hate.
I don't want to suggest it. It's terrible.
It's fun.
He says the point to note is that in the unplanned scramble of human life through the centuries of the horse and foot period, these incessant recurring outbreaks of the losers against the winners, this is after him talking about the French Revolution, he says, they have never once produced any permanent amelioration of the common lot or greatly changed the features of the human community. Not once. I 100% agree with him, and to me, that is evidence that the human being is a fixed thing with proclivities and weaknesses and problems and strengths, and it is what it is, and it doesn't matter what you do. But he's smarter than me, apparently.
Yeah. Hi, Brett again. This is the end of the first part. Make sure you check back next week for the second hour of this discussion.